West is afraid of me. I have seen their true face. The LCS are extended gutters, and the gutters are full of Western trash, and when the drains are overflowing with imports, all the native scrubs will drown. The accumulated filth of their streaming and their lack of tryharding will bury them, and all the whores and analysts will look up and shout, "Save us!" And I'll look down and whisper, "Alpha Draft." Cloud9 are once again one of the best North American teams in LCS, and they're a very interesting team in terms of where the strengths lie and the win conditions of how they win a game and what the future of the team likely is. Considering they're a team that last year, obviously, when they had to put High as the jungler, as a rescue band-aid measure, and then they had to run Incarnation to hard carry them through to the Worlds, and they didn't even make the playoffs of LCS, but that gauntlet qualifier run got them to Worlds, and they even got the 3 wins on the first week. The team that in the summer split was in dire straits, and they were really low down in the table and looked like Cloud9 would never again be a viable contender for the title. Well, they're in position again to potentially be a contender for the title. So right now, Cloud9 are sat at 3rd in the NALCS. They've won 9 games and they've lost 5. So there's a 64% win rate, still a very respectable win rate. They've been top 3 for the whole split, with the exception of week 3, where they dropped down to 4th. In terms of wins, they've gotten a win over CLG, they've gotten 2 wins over NRG, they've beaten TSM out of the really high quality teams. They've also beaten Echo Fox, Renegades, Dignitas, Team Liquid. So they've beaten every single team in the league except Immortals, who obviously were undefeated up until recently, and TIP, who actually shocked Cloud9. The downside is they've also lost to a number of teams. So they've lost to CLG, they've lost both their games to Immortals, they've lost to TIP, they've lost to TSM. So they've actually lost to everyone in the league except Echo Fox, NRG, Renegades, Dignitas, and Team Liquid. Now, of those 5 teams that they haven't lost to, Echo Fox obviously had, they didn't actually have subs in the first game when they played them, but they're not considered an elite team. They're not going to contend for the title most likely. NRG looked really hot earlier in the season, but now seem a bit one-dimensional, and they just don't get wins in the same with any kind of dominance that they look like they might have a chance to perform early on. They're just like a also-ran team. Maybe they can be a decent threat for a semi-final if things go really well. That's like a decent team to not have lost to. Renegades, obviously, no one cares. Dignitas have been fairly underwhelming when you consider the initial fluke wins. And Team Liquid have had some okay games. They have been up and down. They've been not that bad. So really, out of the teams they haven't lost to, the only really quality one is NRG, and even they are in some sort of issue. So even though they can beat everyone, they can also lose to pretty much everyone. And they obviously can't beat Immortals at the moment, but pretty much no one could. So that's kind of taken off the table. When you look at the team in terms of the players, you start to see some of the issues they're having when you put the team together and look at all the pieces beyond just the individual aspects. So let's break them down individually. Let's start with Balls. Now, he was one of the main reasons why Cloud9 went completely to shit in the summer split of last year. I'll tell you what, not a lot's changed. They might be doing a lot better as a team, and he might be getting wins on champions with that whole stat that I hate, which is that you've got wins on a champion. Like, that can sort of mean something, but you really have to know qualitatively what the win was like in that sense. Like, were you a main part of it? Was that even a pick that's a strong pick yours? Was one that left over? The problem with Balls is, yeah, he has wins on champions, but he's still pretty shit. If we were to rank all the top laners, he'd be pretty far down the list, and he wouldn't be anywhere near the top competition that are making up some of the other top teams in the league, and he's an obvious weak spot in that sense. So he's been pretty bad. Okay, he's gotten some wins on Fiora. Problem is, one of those was against Renegades, and again, that almost doesn't even count as a win. Who gives a fuck? It's Renegades. And the other one was against Echo Fox early on in the season, when they had that totally brand new lineup where no one even knew how the fuck that lineup would make it work. So there's 2 of his 3 wins or whatever on Fiora. So I don't really put that much stock in, like, well, at least he's mastered Fiora. Not really. He has been much improved in the last couple of weeks from how bad he was for the first few weeks, for the first sort of like 5 or 6 weeks of the season. But even so, it's still not looking good overall. It doesn't look like he's turned some corner for good, as we saw last week. He's someone where one of the downsides of his problems is that it draws jungle attention away from Jensen, the mid laner, because
Jensen's the star player. He's the mid laner. He's the person you want getting the jungle attention, especially if someone like Rush, who can be a playmaker, who can be an incredibly skilled mechanical player. You want that synergy going on between jungler and mid lane. But there are certain games you have, obviously against Immortals, where you're going to have Jensen having to live on his own in mid lane, play blind in certain areas, and know he's not going to have the jungler because Rush, the jungler, is having to go top lane to help, to prop up, to protect, to counter gank, to try and maybe even get balls ahead in certain scenarios. Because if you're against a player like Huni or any of the other good top laners in LCS for that matter, it's going to be a bad day for balls. It's going to be a fucking bad day for Cloud9 if they let balls just get massively behind. So you're essentially trying to plug that leak by taking Rush away from Jensen. So you're going to manage to maybe do that a lot of the time, but then you're going to suffer with not having him to pump up Jensen, to get him going. So that's an issue you've got right now, which they can make work, but that's a problem when you're going forwards, especially against better level teams as you go into international competition, for example. There's also a fact that if we go to an international competition like Worlds or an MSI type scenario, they're obviously not going to MSI, go to a Worlds type scenario, let's be real, unless they luck out and get some crazy super tank meta, Balls is going to be a massive liability, and he's not going to be able to hang, and they're either, again, just going to lose outright, or they're going to have to plug the leak using Rush and then suffer in terms of mid lane, and so it then limits their strengths as well. So I can see there's already being a massive problem. Then you go down to Rush, the guy who obviously we're talking about here in connection with Balls. The thing with Rush is, on paper, when you saw how incredible he was in Tip, where he was just he was 1v9 in games, he was just playing. You could ban him off certain champs, but you'd always have another champ he could play on. He could make all these sick plays throughout the game. He could get people rolling. And at the time before Tiplosh Xiao, he was really sick, and he was making the team pretty much a potential contender, potential finalist of LCS. That Rush hasn't really shown up in Cloud9 a whole lot. It's clear that he's still good, and he is still adapting. Like he's making some progress in this respect, but he's still not the Rush from Tip who just takes over the whole game, which obviously is unfortunate because now he's got carries again, and now he's in a position where potentially now he could be helping his team be really sick and really have insane leads in the first 8 minutes and then be snowballing the game, like you see someone like Jankos do over in Europe. Jankos. I don't know why I always say Jankos. That's in my mind somehow. The problem I see for Rush is that I've watched this guy play a lot of those solo queue games when he goes to Korea, and he is fucking unreal in solo queue. This is one of the best junglers in the world, solo queue style. Incredible mechanics, can just carry a game, much as he did in Tip in competitive play. Problem is, in Cloud9, we don't see that Rush either. He tries to make plays in terms of how he moves around the map is still very solo queue-ish. Like he just moves around wherever he wants to go. But the big problem I see overall is that it doesn't seem like he's a good team jungler. Like he doesn't have that aspect at the moment where he knows where to be in terms of helping other people get going, in terms of helping the overall team aspect of what we need to be doing right now. And so it's one thing if Hai's going to micro him or if he's going to send him around the map, but at the moment that still hasn't quite been figured out. There's still a gap there that has to be bridged if they want to become a better team and they want to have more of an impact from Rush, who's obviously a very skilled player and has a lot of potential in terms of what we've seen from in the past, but so far not quite shown up in Cloud9 yet to the degree that we'd expect considering how phenomenal he is and now that he has some good carries. There's also those games he played on Nunu where I don't know what the point of those games was, because it was a viable champion in the jungle pool, but at the time you've got all these strong mechanical champions that other people are dominating on and getting early kills with, and Rush is exactly the sort of player you want doing that all the time if you can. And so it's a scenario where I don't care if he wanted to play him, if people told him to play him, if it just seemed like the right pick. In general, that's not the approach you want to be going towards, and that just triggers me because it reminds me of that spring split of 2015 where they went against TSM and he'd been a monster all split long, single-handedly winning games, and I thought they're going to beat TSM this time, and then the motherfucker just locked in Nunu over and over again and just tried to play Nunu as if it was Lee Sin, and it was an abject failure, and you thought, why is someone doing this? Taking away their own strengths, essentially neutralizing themselves. So that's just a bit of a worry there, because that makes me wonder if he's thinking, if his conception of being a team jungler now, and not just being the solo queue jungler, is to pick stuff just for the team, or to pick more supportive style, or to pick stuff just to help a certain aspect of the game. That's not what you want. You want Rush to be Rush, especially because at the moment we've got problems with balls. So if we can have a carry coming out of the jungle, that can make up for it. That's another carry threat we can have on the map, and it can be very dangerous with someone like Jensen or with Sneaky. Speaking of which, we'll go to the bot lane now. because we've done balls, we've done rush. The next big problem I see is the whole high Bunny Fufu situation. Now, obviously, it's not a situation right now. Bunny Fufu doesn't play right now. It's now high. The big issue there is Bunny Fufu's losses and initial poor performance for Cloud9 made it easy for them to say, right, just bring High back in. He gives us the shot calling. Bunny didn't prove himself. First of all, they didn't give Bunny Fufu enough games. Now, admittedly, they got to see all the scrims he had, so maybe they're basing off that. They did not give this guy enough competitive games. And they brought him in a scenario where he couldn't just come in and just play support, which he is a good player at and he is a natural talent at. They brought him in, and then people were going to judge not just him playing support, but then what the shot calling issues in the team were. And since High is a very good shot caller, one of the best we've ever had in the West, and him being in the game in any capacity makes the team better in terms of shot calling, it's just too much for Bunny Fufu to overcome. I mean, essentially, you'd have to go in the game and just be like fucking Gorilla and be some godlike support player for him to have any chance, because that's how they'd have to overcome all the issues not having as good shot calling, which he doesn't bring anyway. So the issue there is it should have been more of an issue. It should have been a tough choice as to which way do we go on this, because obviously High doesn't have much of a future in terms of League of Legends. He can only play for a limited amount of time. We don't know when he's going to leave the team and what they'll be left with at that point in time. So do we build for the future? You can only build for the future if you put in a Bunny Fufu, if you put in someone else, if you take High out. Instead, they're essentially saying the Bunny Fufu experiment is over. And I don't like that in terms of the president. It's even though it's making them a good team right now. Admittedly, not the best team, which is a key point that makes the not as good a gamble right now. Now, with High, they obviously have good shot calling. Still very good. He does seem actually better as a support player than he was as a jungler, I have to say. He wasn't a very good jungler, I didn't think, even towards the end. As a support player, he seems pretty good. In NA, he's definitely serviceable. At times, good. Like, this is all fine. The problem is he's never going to be a world-class support player. It's just not going to happen. Now, obviously, he's less of a liability if he's a godlike shot caller but not that good at support, rather than a godlike shot caller and not that good at mid, contrasted against the best players in the world in that position. That is less of a liability. The problem I have is, on an international level, I can only see him being decent as a support, and so you do have another liability, another leak, in some respect on Cloud9. And here's the problem. The reason why I say another isn't in reference to him in the past as a mid laner, it's in reference to Balls right now. Balls is going to be a liability. So I have a theory in general about teams, which goes, once you get to the top international level, you can usually only have one leak in the ship. It's called the leaky ship theory. You can have one leak, and then either you just leave that leak and you just hope that you get where you're going and the ship doesn't flood, or you can use another aspect of the team to plug the leak, and so you've neutralized two aspects of the team, but the rest of the team's all great, or the rest of the team's exceptional in a certain area or style of play or moments in the game when they can be very good. And in that scenario, you know your win conditions, they're more limited, but you can win the game. And if that all works out, you can be the best team, and the leak doesn't kill you, doesn't drown you all, doesn't fuck the whole ship up. Problem in this scenario is, they already have the leak, which is Balls, and they already have the plug at the moment, just to send Rush and to draw attention towards Balls and to help him out and to make him less of a liability. Problem is, they then have a second liability if they come to international play, which is likely going to be High. And to plug Balls then takes away some of the security and some of the playmaking around Jensen, their main star carry, and so in a way you've made sort of a half leak there. So you've got like 2.5 leaks in the team at the moment. If you come up, make a meme, 2.5 leaks. If you come up to the international level, because Jensen also needs to be your super carry, and he has to be the guy who gets ahead. And if you're going to win against international competition, it's surely got to go through either directly or partially Jensen. It's got to be him. And so if you take strength away from him as well, you're reducing your strengths just to reduce your weaknesses. Now, that's not a good scenario, and the leaky ship theory tells me that Cloud9's going to have problems if they go international in that sense. There's also an issue that I think partly because of High playing in this position. It's funny, obviously in the past, Lamination was never a superstar support player. He was always good, and he had good positioning, and he knew what to do. And he was an intelligent player and synergized all sneaky, but he was never some star laner. Now, the problem was, there was times when Bunny Fufu was very strong, especially obviously on his Thresh. So we were all hoping, right, Bunny Fufu comes in, now Sneaky can be a true star AD carry. He's been very good before in NALCS terms, but now he can be like lane dominant. We can see really what happens when you kind of like unlock this guy, give him the keys to the engine and just let him go. Like it's your team now, mate. Unfortunately, with High, it feels like that's not going to happen. Like Sneaky's still good. Sneaky's above average, certainly. He has games where he's very good. But when you consider all the AD carry talent in the West now, it doesn't look like Sneaky's going to be a monster again, as long as he's playing with High. Also, you got to factor in that High has played 6 games of Morgana, and they've won all 6 of those. Now, that's not going to last forever. People are just going to ban that shit eventually. Not only that, you go international where people have these crazy wide pools and they can even like flex pick stuff and you never quite know where they're going. And if that's the sort of scenario where obviously it might not still be Morgana, maybe another champion at that point in time, if he has a limited champion pool, there are going to be some big issues there. So right now, he has a limited champion pool, and that's one of the things we have to look to in the future, because NLCS might let him play that shit, but that's not going to work out on the international level. Now, also, I just want to see what happens when people ban Morgana. I want to see what happens when he has to play other champions for like 7 games or something. In terms of High, the big issue for me is his future. Like, unless somehow the RSI issues are not a problem anymore, if he's overcoming that, if he suddenly is motivated to want to play for years more, if playing support frees him up from the criticism of not being a good mid laner, and now he thinks, right, I can play internationally, and if we fix the rest of the team, I want to play for a few more years. If that all happens, great. But as far as I know, based on the things I've seen thus far, it was suggested that he still is someone with a clock on his career, like whether it's a split or 2, whether it's the end of the year, whether it's like until we get another player, whatever it might be. The problem is at the moment, High is a band-aid. He's a fantastic band-aid. He's doing a great job and making him in ALCS competitive and having a chance to do well. But when you consider they only have a chance to do well, even in NA, the international chances are very limited. And so how do we progress from this? How do we get better? And not only that, if we're going to constantly go back to using the band-aid every time there's a problem and we try someone else, bring back the band-aid when we have an issue with it, how are we ever going to learn as a team, and how is it ever going to get to another level? Because they'll keep relying on that crutch of High. In some ways, it'd almost be better if he did just permanently retire and they had no choice but to go to a new team. Like they tried to, remember, when they first brought in Incarnation and had Meteos becoming the shot caller. But obviously they went back and they got High out of retirement, like flew out to the fucking log cabin and were like, hey man, go do that one last job, man. Okay, but this is for Mendoza. Like, you know, all that shit. They did that already, but they can't keep doing that every single season. Once you get past High, now you get into the good parts of the team. So let's start with Jensen. He is a star player of this team. Not only that, he's a star player in NALCS. This guy is one of the best players any position in NALCS. He's a really good player. He's consistent. His champion pool is deep. He's a player where it seems like the way he picks his champions in general, he's now gotten to the point where he's not picking them because he wants to be safe or scared. He picks them because he understands what he wants to do with that champion, and he's become consistent. Like in team fights, you see him do this consistent damage output. One of the good things at Worlds was even when they started to lose all those games after the first week, he wasn't one of the reasons why they lost that and didn't get to the playoffs. He was still playing well. He was doing his damnedest. He was trying really hard to carry them to the fucking playoffs. He just couldn't do it with all those weights around his neck. He's a very good player. He's never going to be the incarnation of solo queue in Season 3, where he's the monster, kill everyone on Fizz. That's not even the style he's using in LCS. But he has become effective. He's managed to get a happy medium between the like overly safe, conservative, scared player who didn't have enough vision and therefore wouldn't make a play early on in his Cloud9 career, and like an aggressive player, to where now he's effective when he does it. He's effective, he's efficient, and he does good damage. So I think he's a very solid player to build around as a carry. And if I had to pick a team in NLCS right now and start a team off, like this is the player you're going to start your franchise with, in terms of traditional carry roles, he'd certainly be one of the picks for NLCS. He's a very good pick to start out with as your star player. Now, it has to be said, the only issue for him is the whole jungle synergy with Rush, which still hasn't quite been as flawless as you want, because you think if you've got a guy playing like Nidalee and Lee Sin, and he's incredibly mechanically skilled, and in solo queue always gets rolling a snowball with a couple of kills early, that's going to be perfect for a guy like Jensen. It hasn't quite worked out that way, though. It's good, but there's still something off there, and that's something that needs to be fixed. And unfortunately, I think the whole balls issue just distracts from that. If we get rid of balls, if you had a player in there, like a Haunter, a Quaz, an Impact, someone who just plays a solid, consistent top lane and isn't a leak and a liability, then we'd know if this was even an issue in terms of the Rush Jensen synergy, or if it could grow from beyond that. Whereas as long as we have that distraction, we'll never quite get the answer to that question, I feel like. Then you go to Sneaky. Sneaky's still good. He's still bordering on that star level from time to time. He's got solid meta picks throughout the game. He's been very good in that respect. He's not like the original Sneaky that first came to LCS and just played what he wanted in his comfort champions. He seems to have his limitations with High, but in NALCS he can get over that. On international level, will he be able to? I'm not really that confident overall. As a team, they're a team that has good macros still, because they have the fantastic shot calling that comes from High, and that means that overall they seem to be pretty good decision making in general. They have a strong carry in Jensen, and then they have a solid threat in Sneaky. So they have a solid 2-threat team there with very good potential from one player, and another one can back him up at times. So the problem is, though, that is really the carry threat from the team right now. As a result, they're a bit limited, and they don't have an option from balls. And at the moment, Rush hasn't quite been integrated to the level where he can go full tip mode, carry the whole game, or he can just be the supportive player who sets up the others and facilitates his main two carries to win the game. He's still between the two, so he's not really a threat. So at the moment, they're a bit limited in terms of where the threat's coming from, but those are consistent, reliable threats. They have problems at both of the supportive positions. I've mentioned the Rush one is the synergy, having to plug one area when maybe he should be working on another one. And then High in terms of he's never going to be a superstar player. He's never going to be a top international player at that position. So as a result, you go to the international level and the issues are obvious. I mean, top support are going to be issues. And then beyond that, mid at the moment, if it gets left out there every now and then, can't be as effective as it is in NLCS and wouldn't be anywhere on an international level. So you need everything from the mid at that point in time. But if we look to playoffs in NLCS, so if we consider the other sort of teams who are going to be in the playoffs, here's how I think things would go in terms of matchup. So against CLG, I think this will be a great matchup. This will be really fun because, first of all, they're two of the best shot calling teams in the league. So it would be a fantastic macro war and back and forth, and you'd never quite know who'd won in terms of comeback potential. So that would be sick just to see the objectives, see how people shot called their way around the map. I think that would be a really fun series. I also think it'd be interesting in terms of the difference in terms of the carries, because obviously the mid laner of CLG is someone who has the limited champion pool and at times probably can be banned out, and I think will be weaker than Jensen, who I think is a much better player at mid lane. But then CLG has Darshan, who has a much wider champion pool than someone like Balls and is a much better carry player at the moment and will do that split push style. So it's the battle, it's that matchup style of like, well, who would win out in that situation? It reminds me of the whole Fnatic versus Ku thing where it's like, okay, Smeb's going to dumpster Huni, but then can Febiven beat up Kuro enough to make it worthwhile? Like, how would that dynamic work? It's always hard to know that. I'm not an expert enough to know myself from watching the game. I can only make my speculations. So I think that would be a really fun series. At the moment, it feels like CLG would win it. And I don't just mean just because they've got a better record. I think they've got some more quality wins when I look at them over the season. So I think they might have slightly stronger macro in terms of the whole team, even though I think in terms of shot calling, probably High is still the king in NA. So that would be a great series. If they were to play TSM, this would be great just for a clash of styles. Like, to me, TSM shot calling is trash. TSM has a strong mid laner who's one of the stars of the league. That would be going head to head individually against Sneaky. In terms of AD carries, Sneaky and Doublelift have been two of the best over the last year or so. That's another solid matchup. Top laner, Haunts is not really the sort of straight bully style. Like, he has had some good games, but that helps to have his jungler. So I would like to see how the jungle top synergy would work out in a matchup like that. And in terms of stars, since I think TSM has pretty trash shot calling, but better players, it's skill versus smarts for me, that matchup. So I'd like to see how that one goes. And I think in general, it's actually that's one of the harder ones to call, because normally I would say that macro should win out. So I would think C9 should be able to win a series like that. But TSM does have the players where they've got more talent in the team overall, and they have more ways to win in terms of their talent, in terms of who can get going and who can carry the game. So I think it would really depend on how much of a liability Balls is going to be in that series. So against NRG, obviously they have the fantastic record. They've beaten them twice. I think that's a great team to go against, actually. They've shown a few weaknesses, and in general, some of their players have... I mean, the problem with their team is some of their players are just all right, aren't they, if we're being real? They've still got people like GBM, fantastic player, but some of the others are just all right. So actually, I think they'd have a very good chance against NRG. I think they'd beat them if they were to play them. If they play Team Liquid, likewise, I think Team Liquid's okay. I think Team Liquid doesn't have enough star players that carry roles, therefore they beat them in that sense. I think Team Liquid's macro is a bit overrated because they've been okay at times and they haven't got back into games. That's all brilliant, etc. But there have been so many messy Team Liquid games that I think that's actually an ideal scenario for someone like C9 to play, and that you're going to get your 3 out of your 5 games and get the series win there. I think that the only team that would be terrible for C9 to play is obviously Immortals. I mean, first of all, Immortals can fuck around and you can get a lead on them. They can still come back. They can be ahead, they can throw a bit of the lead, they can still win the game. They're going to beat you up from nearly all the positions. I mean, I would still say Pobelter can be beaten up by Jensen, but Pobelter's not going to play an aggressive style. He's played his whole career knowing how to deal with Gazeta and just be safe. And if other people carry the game, he doesn't need to. So that to some degree neutralizes Jensen there. And obviously the big problem is Huni is going to fucking wreck Balls. So either you're going to abandon Balls or Rush is going to be in the top lane all the time trying to help out Huni, except the problem is Huni has Reign over, and that's a classic synergy, and that is there to get Huni ahead so that he can shit all over your team. So you're going to have some major issues there. I think overall, Immortals is the only really bad Series 1. So as a result, when I think of going into the playoffs, I think they've got a very good chance to make top 4 of Cloud9. Now, if they don't have to play Immortals in the semi-final, I think they've got a decent shot at finals, because I'm imagining they'll be playing someone like CLG or TSM in the semi-finals if they don't play Immortals. Therefore, I think that they've got a pretty good chance to. Like against CLG, maybe I'd give CLG the slight edge there. Against TSM, I'd give C9 the slight edge there. So I think they've got a decent chance to go to another finals, which is something incredible when you consider how terrible they were last year in the summer split. But it's a new era of Cloud9, and they can get back to roughly being where the old Cloud9 used to be before they made the change to Incarnation. Now, the major issues for Cloud9, High's future, obviously, still very much unresolved. Ball's remaining as a player is an issue because he hasn't been replaced. They haven't made any moves as far as I can tell to replace him. And who do they replace him with? I mean, the obvious choice is you wait until Impact gets his NA residency and then bring him in, because he would be just what the doctor ordered. Like, stable player, great tank player, obviously can work with someone like Rush speaking Korean. Then High isn't as much of a liability. He's the only potential liability in an LTS. He's not a liability. Then you've got like a solid top laner, you've got a solid and above average AD carry, and you've got a very good mid laner. That's like a formula for a great team there, assuming you can then get Rush and Jensen synergized and working together and coordinated. But the shot calling's there. You've got good presence at all the carry roles. You've got solid supportive players. That's a good team right there. That would be one I'd like to see, but that's obviously something for down the line.